có đêm có ngày, tấn công liên tục. Nhưng mà nó chỉ là 4 bên xung quanh là nó bao vây hết mà.
Vâng.
Chỉ là nó tấn công hướng này, nó chính diện là ở bên đây lọ đây.
Once again, armies on the move in Indochina. Tonight, a first-hand account and analysis of the border war between two communist neighbors, Vietnam and Cambodia. Good evening. Trying to figure out what's happening in the sudden, sharp war between Vietnam and Cambodia has been a bit like following a football game from outside the stadium. All the reports in our newspapers and on television this week depend on bits of intelligence gleaned from third countries and filtered through the blare of propaganda on either side. But one American has actually been in the frontier war zone. Tonight, with the film The Vietnamese Let Him Take, and with other expert views, we try to piece together the new Vietnam War. Jim?
Robin, there is one aspect of this new war about which there is no confusion. The Vietnamese and the Cambodians never have liked each other. It's a religious, political conflict that goes back centuries. Their semi-united communist effort against the United States in the big Indochina War is seen by most experts now as just a temporary relaxation of that basic hostility. The Cambodian communists feel the Vietnamese communists have always tried to dominate them, to treat them as second-class citizens, to rob them of their territory. The major fighting between them is concentrated in one particular area of the 700-mile border that separates the two countries, a thumb-like piece of Cambodia known as Parrot's Beak. Robin?
Both Cambodia and Vietnam have limited access for Western journalists. Public television reporter-producer John Alpert was in Vietnam last week working on a documentary report. He was taken by the Vietnamese to a contested area near the Cambodian border. John, you were making a documentary, how did you get up to the fighting area?
We rode in a truck that used to belong to the United States Navy. We weren't aware that we were going into the border area. We were actually going to go to the Delta that day. But in the morning they announced that they wanted to take us over towards Cambodia.
And you didn't have any reason, you didn't understand why at that time?
No, that morning we become aware of the fighting. But up until that time, for the 4 or 5 weeks we were in Vietnam, we weren't aware that there was heavy conflict.
What kind of a place did they take you to and what did they let you see?
We took a trip to an area where there had been very heavy fighting. The Vietnamese claim that thousands of people have been killed in that area. It's just north of the Parrot's Beak.
That would be, can we have the map back there? Yeah, just up there, is that it?
No, it's closer into Cambodia. Yes, right in that area.
More in that area there, yeah, I see.
Right. Now the Cambodians say that that's their land.
Yes.
And the Vietnamese say it's theirs.
And as we understand from the reports at the moment, the Vietnamese are reported to have pushed the Cambodians right back into a line somewhere inside Cambodian territory. What was the Vietnamese purpose in showing you what they did?
They told me that they wanted world opinion to help end this war, that they thought that there was inflationary rhetoric all around the world, and if somebody could take a look at this and bring back a message to the United States about the war and that people were dying, perhaps people would calm down and help them.
Well, let's take a look at what they let you bring back at your first piece of your film. How does it begin?
Well, this begins with a military briefing at the local headquarters in Tây Nam province.
Là 7 cây số. The deepest penetration was 7 kilometers. It was here that they attacked and massacred many.
Chưa có một cái ngày nào và chưa có một thời gian nào mà đồng bào chúng tôi cùng một lúc bị tàn sát.
Never before. In this history of 31 years, never before there had been one day and one incident in which so many of our compatriots were killed.
Sẽ làm cái biên giới giữa Việt Nam và Campuchia.
They want to establish this river and the frontier between Vietnam and Cambodia.
So they're accusing the Cambodians of wanting to extend the frontier to that river.
Yeah, it's a tremendous piece of real estate. Hundreds of square miles are contested.
Did you, what you saw, justify what the Vietnamese were claiming? He just said that never before in 31 years of fighting there had so many people of their people been killed in one attack.
Well, at first it looked very peaceful. Fishermen at their ponds. But when you talk to the fishermen, it turns out that those ponds were left over from the bombs that the American planes dropped during the war. So it's very hard to tell how heavy the fighting was. But as we approached the front, we began to see that almost all the houses showed evidence of being burned. That was the main thing we could see. And then when we got very close to the front, we saw many graveyards. There was 10 graveyards about this size near the front.
Yeah, and what were your impressions of how the locals felt about all this?
Well, almost everyone had a story Whether it was their mother or their father, everyone in that area had been touched by the war. Many had been forced to flee and evacuate the settlements that they had made there. And we spoke to many people about their experiences in the battles.
Thế bác thấy người Campuchia, thấy bọn phản động.
Đêm thì ta vừa đi đến đâu ta la đó là vợ tôi nó bỏ tiếng miên rồi phải chạy. Thế là mới trong hầm mới chạy, còn con tôi thì nó nhất định nó bám hầm. Thế là nó mới chết. Chứ còn tôi chạy được thì tôi không chết, tôi ra vườn mía tôi nằm đến sáng tôi chạy.
It's been reported, John, here that the Vietnamese under General Giap had used as many as 60,000 troops in their attack or counterattack, whichever it is, into Cambodia. Did you have the feeling there of major military activity in the area?
I didn't see huge-scale troop movements. I saw large artillery pieces, and I saw in the huts of the peasants, all the peasants. It's very unfortunate in that whole region. This was a region that both countries want to develop for rice farming. All the peasants have been cleared out, and in their houses, groups of 10 or 12 soldiers in each house shielding themselves from the sun.
I see. Let's look at your next piece of film. And this is still in the same area, or this is closer to the front?
This, we continue to drive towards the front. And this
Towards
trip,
Cambodia.
right.
And what does that sign say?
That's a mother bidding farewell to her son as he goes to the front.
So that the country is becoming conscious of a national emergency.
Yes, as you approach the border, you see more and more of these signs and more evidence that there's a war.
And did you see a lot of troops? Do you have any sense of the numbers of troops you saw on that one day there?
In the day we were there, we saw 20 or 30 trucks this size going back and forth, most of them towards the front.
Did you see any wounded in the trucks?
No, I didn't.
Did these look like reinforcements or just troops being relieved and exchanged or what?
It's really hard. You know, Americans are always so surprised when they see how young the troops look, and I couldn't tell whether they were reinforcements or not. Everybody looked fresh.
I see. The reports speak of the Vietnamese being much stronger, apparently, than the Cambodian fighters. Did you get that impression in this place?
You couldn't tell. They had dug trenches here. They had dug about a mile's worth of trenches in 3 months. There were spent shells all over the floor, but at the time we were there wasn't much fighting, but soldiers told us that there had been a lot of action. We didn't know how dangerous it really was until we had this translated.
Thế không nhổ được đi.
Không nhổ được đi.
Không nhổ được đi.
Chỉ bao vây mình ở trong.
Nó bao vây mình ở trong này thôi. Tất nhiên là mình trong này chỉ có là 30 mấy đồng chí thôi, khoảng chừng 40 thôi. Nhưng mà trong đó không có chỉ hy sinh một, với một nó đi công tác lẻ. Từng ngày chung ngày 5 đêm nó tấn công liên tục mà. Khi ngày khi đêm, có khi là dắt đêm 3-4 đợt liền nó tấn công một đêm đấy.
Now, those graves were all marked September 1977. Did you get the impression that, in fact, these attacks that he said in the nighttime are still continuing, or that it had ended?
Yes, they told me that there had been attacks that week previously, but in the day that we were there, it was very quiet.
I see. So you really were, in effect, in the front line there.
I guess so. I mean, when I had this tape translated and found out that he said we were surrounded, it made me jump back a little bit. It didn't seem that dangerous at the time.
But you didn't have enough objective information. They weren't giving you enough really to know where you were and what in fact the situation was.
No, and it's very unfortunate we were not able to get much information on what the Cambodians were saying. We, and as this film indicates, were able to see only from the Vietnamese side. And the Cambodians, of course, say whatever the Vietnamese say is black, the Cambodians are saying is white.
Did you ask them if you could go up and see the actual fighting?
I did, and they said no, because with the first American journalists there, they didn't want to take any chances of a stray bullet and some explaining to do.
You also spent 5 weeks in Vietnam altogether, a lot of it in the cities of Hanoi and Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City as it's called now. Was there a sense of the country being at war, involved in a major war in those cities?
No, there wasn't. Especially in the beginning of our trip, they have many serious problems, economic problems, social problems that they're dealing with. And the only thing that came out towards the end is that everybody feels a sense of sorrow that after such a short peace, everybody's back at war again.
But you knew in Saigon in the last few days that the country was at war.
The last few days, that's all that everybody was talking about.
Well, thank you. Jim?
All right, a longtime student of the many conflicts, military as well as ideological, that have torn through Indochina through the years is Gareth Porter. Mr. Porter has written extensively about Southeast Asia and was co-director of the Indochina Resource Center. He's now an associate fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies here in Washington. Mr. Porter, what do you think triggered this fighting?
Well, I think you have to look at this at several levels. One, obviously, the historical background in which, from the Cambodian point of view, they've always seen the Vietnamese as a threat to, not merely a threat to their security, but a threat to their national existence. Cambodia has lost territory historically in past centuries to the Vietnamese. They have felt that the Vietnamese were a stronger nation, a more dynamic nation, and they have been very conscious and very insecure about Cambodia's own lack of dynamism and a sense of decline over many centuries. I think this has played a role in forming the consciousness of the Cambodian leadership today. Secondly, during the period of formation of the Indo-Chinese Communist movement, that is in the three countries of Indochina, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, it was the Vietnamese who developed first and most strongly. They had initially, of course, hegemony in terms of political leadership over the communists in the other two countries, and it was only...
In other words, the Vietnamese did.
The Vietnamese did.
Right.
And it was only relatively recently, in the 1950s, that the Cambodians began to develop as an independent communist movement, so that the Cambodian leaders have experienced Vietnamese leadership even within the communist movement in Indochina, and they're very suspicious that this, again, is a repetition of historical experience in which the Vietnamese dominated.
But specifically, what's happened? You know, they were allies up until 2 years ago when, you know, both of them won what they wanted, which was the control of their nations. What's happened in this last 2 years in specific terms to cause these people to actually be shooting at each other now?
Well, it's true that they were allies, but it was a very uneasy alliance from the very beginning. The Cambodians have charged that even from 1965, and especially after 1970, when the Vietnamese troops, which were stationed on the border in Cambodia, fighting in Vietnam, were attacked from Vietnam by American soldiers and moved inward towards Phnom Penh and began to give arms and training to Cambodian revolutionaries. The Cambodians charged that the Vietnamese used that as an opportunity to try to gain influence in Cambodian politics. Now, it's very difficult to know exactly what happened, but obviously the Vietnamese did influence a number of Cambodians in the sense of giving them training, and perhaps had a political influence on them, and this was perceived as a great threat by Cambodian communist leaders. So I think even that played a role in their suspicions and their fear that Vietnamese, after the war, would attempt to dominate them. So I think all of these experiences make the Cambodians paranoid. I don't think it's too strong a word to use about the Vietnamese communists. And the Cambodians, I think, revert very much to traditional Cambodian attitudes toward the Vietnamese. On the other side, I think it's important to realize that the Vietnamese have a rather different view from their side of the relationship. I think they see the relationship as fundamentally, in the past, one of allies and of equals, and that they feel that they have not tried to dominate the Cambodians, they've only lent assistance. So I think from their point of view...
They just deny everything the Cambodians
well,
say.
They see it as something completely different.
Let me ask you finally, do you see this problem as something that cannot be negotiated, or is it possible to work out a solution, or are we going to have this war or something bigger than this from now until somebody wins or whatever?
I think there's a useful historical precedent, not exact, but perhaps enlightening, and that is the 1962 China-India border war. At the time, everyone thought the Chinese, having gone into India very strongly, were the aggressors, but then suddenly the Chinese pulled back and the border quieted down. And I think the Vietnamese were trying to, at this point, to teach the Cambodians a lesson, that they cannot solve the border problem unilaterally by force. And I think the Vietnamese do really want a negotiated settlement and wanted to use overwhelming force to try to stop the war and impose negotiations. And I think what we will find in the future is that the Vietnamese will be very accommodating in terms of their willingness to settle the border conflict.
All right, thank you. Robin?
Yes, let's look a little more closely at Hanoi's motives, the Vietnamese motives. The chief Washington correspondent for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Richard Dudman, has spent much time in Southeast Asia. Mr. Dudman was the first American journalist to visit Vietnam after the fall of Saigon. That trip, last fall, was his 8th to Vietnam. Mr. Dudman, do you agree with what we've just heard, that the Vietnamese were in a sense forced into this to teach the Cambodians a lesson?
That Chinese analogy is the one I like too. When I was there in September and October, the Vietnamese spoke more in sorrow than in anger about what was going on. They didn't want to discuss the actual fighting at all. They took me around the country, and they weren't telling their own people there was fighting going on either, obviously, because unlike what we heard from Mr. Alpert, there wasn't any discussion of any war at all. I heard about it some from international reports on Voice of America, but that was it. And I was within 30 or 40 miles of the place where those people died at the time they were being killed. And I didn't know that the degree of fighting at all. One time the Vietnamese said to me, "Did you hear the radio report this morning about some fighting?" And I said, "Was it true?" And they didn't want to talk about it, but they wanted to call my attention to it. They described it as a true border dispute, in the first place an unmarked border for many years with elements of civilian population intermingled with a dispute by both sides, so that they were intermingling military outposts very much in the manner that India and China were doing that in the early 1960s.
Do you believe, Mr. Dudman, from your knowledge and what you've sort of been able to gather since, that the Vietnamese were actually, as they claimed, trying to settle this diplomatically and the Cambodians didn't want to?
Well, I think that, I'm not sure just what happened. There was a meeting in May of 1976, and the negotiations were broken off. The Vietnamese referred to that to me as if the Cambodians had broken off and that the Vietnamese wanted to continue negotiations, and they said they had proposed a continuance and hadn't even been able to get an answer from the Cambodians. The Cambodians now have been saying that they broke off the negotiations themselves because the Vietnamese presented a proposed border settlement that was absolutely unacceptable.
Do you, knowing the Cambodians as you do, and you were actually, I understand, for 6 weeks a prisoner of theirs some years ago, do you, knowing them as you do, in any way credit the atrocity stories that the Vietnamese are putting out about disemboweling pregnant women and so on, or is this just the normal propaganda of war?
I didn't see any of that, but I've seen fanaticism in Cambodians, and I know the stories fully documented of how they killed a great many Vietnamese residents of Cambodia in 1970, and the bodies were coming floating down the river. I saw one thing that indicated, it's a small thing, but it's worth mentioning. When I was a prisoner with 2 other Americans, we were guarded immediately by Viet Cong, by Vietnamese. We were trying to spend part of our time by learning a few Vietnamese phrases. There was a Cambodian sentry outside the door. He stuck his head in and scowled at us, and he said, study Cambodian, don't study Vietnamese." We suspended our lesson.
All right, thank you, Jim.
All right, there are a few Westerners who really know much about that current regime in Cambodia. One man who does is Peter Poole, who as a State Department officer served in Cambodia in the early 60s. He later joined the Defense Department and was stationed in Thailand. The author of a number of books and articles on U.S. policy in Indochina, Mr. Poole is currently an Associate Professor of Political Science at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. Professor Poole, what's your educated theory as to why Cambodia is in this fight? Do you agree with Gareth Porter's analysis and the other things that Dick Dudman has just added to it?
I agree with a lot of the things that they've said. There has been sporadic fighting, as we're all aware, between Cambodian and Vietnamese communists for a number of years. There have been repeated efforts to patch it up at higher levels. They haven't obviously been successful. There probably is more animosity, more sort of spontaneous animosity at the lower levels, out at the border areas, than between the governments in the capital cities. They probably would rather. But the one thing I disagree with a little bit is the point that the Vietnamese see the Cambodians as equals. The Vietnamese don't see the Cambodians. No Vietnamese I've ever met sees Cambodians as equals. The Vietnamese and the Thai both look on the Cambodians as children, and their words for them mean children.
Well, look, let's go to the other question that's been raised about this. It was particularly raised by President Carter's National Security Advisor, Mr. Brzezinski, where out of that the term proxy war has gotten started, obviously meaning Vietnam being the puppets of the Soviets in this, and of course Cambodia of China. Let's talk about Cambodia and its relationship to China first. How do you see that in terms of the influence it may be having on what Cambodia is doing in this war?
Well, I want to respond to that, but first say that I don't think that you need to have great powers pulling the strings here to explain what's going on. The antagonism which you began by referring to at the very beginning of the show, the basic antagonism that goes back before Russia had any presence in the area, before China had, well, the present regime in China was created and whatnot, is a sufficient cause to explain the antagonism between them. You don't need great power dimension at all.
Okay. Need it or not, do they have it?
Yes, it's there. I mean, yes, there's influence. No, it probably isn't a proxy war.
What do you mean by, what do you mean?
Yes, the Chinese have influence in Phnom Penh and some influence with the Vietnamese. Yes, the Russians have some influence with the Vietnamese. But probably, in my opinion, neither China nor Russia would cook up a proxy war.
You agree with that, Mr. Porter?
I certainly agree that this is not an expression of great power influence, this conflict that we're talking about right now. I think that the Chinese may well have done nothing to disabuse the Cambodians of the notion that that they should be afraid of the Vietnamese.
Yeah, but I mean, specifically, would they actually encourage the Cambodians to fight Vietnam on this issue?
I'm not sure. I think that they may have wanted to have tension, but I certainly don't think they wanted this to happen. They must have known that the Vietnamese were far more powerful and would not have encouraged the Cambodians to feel that they could settle the conflict unilaterally by force.
Yeah. What would you say, there would be cheerleaders in this kind of thing, Mr. Poole, or would they be active?
No, I think on the contrary. I think that the Chinese and the Russians...
I'm talking about the Chinese in this particular case.
The Chinese, no, I think they'd be very unhappy about this situation.
All right, now what about Vietnam and its relationship with the Soviet Union, Dick?
The Vietnamese have a closer relationship with Vietnam than do the Chinese, but the Vietnamese are... the Russians have a close relation with Vietnam.
Right.
But the Vietnamese are eager for good relations with both, and they cultivate both, and they're getting major assistance from both in civil engineering projects, food aid, all kinds of things. Food aid has been cut back by the Chinese just because they haven't had a surplus. But I don't see the Russian influence in Vietnam as being a controlling influence of foreign policy at all. The Vietnamese, when they spoke with me about their idea of foreign policy, was to be non-aligned and to have relations with all communist countries especially, and then with the United States and all the Western countries, and they are eagerly going after relations with Sweden and Britain and Japan, all the rest of them.
Well, you would agree then that it's a mistake to see this conflict between Cambodia and Vietnam as a proxy war between China and the Soviet Union?
Yes, I think to raise things to global issues is a mistake often, and this is another one.
All right. Robin?
Let's explore what the United States' role is in this. First of all, back to you, John Alpert. What did the Vietnamese tell you in your 5 weeks there that they wanted the United States' role to be?
Well, I was talking with a high government official, and he said that initially they felt that this situation was a trap for the Vietnamese, and that there was a hunter waiting for the Vietnamese to fall in it. He wouldn't identify the hunter, but many people spoke to me that of all the countries, China, Russia, Vietnam, or Cambodia, the United States government possibly could benefit from this because there would be destabilization of both regimes, and they would like to see these two regimes have trouble.
Was there any suspicion that the United States was in any way fomenting this?
They didn't give me any concrete examples.
I see. Gentlemen in Washington, Mr. Porter, what do you see as the United States' interest and role in this situation?
Well, first of all, it's very interesting that the United States has taken a very restrained attitude towards this war, in the sense of not attempting to exploit it to say that the Vietnamese are being aggressive, or for that matter that the Cambodians particularly are aggressive. And I think this is one sign that the United States really wants to improve its relations with Vietnam seriously. I think the Vietnamese are also interested in better relations with the United States, and this border war, I would say, is probably the most important political event in terms of Vietnamese foreign policy since the end of the war, and will probably have some impact on that foreign policy, will cause the Vietnamese to reevaluate their foreign policy in overall terms. And I think they're more likely now to pursue better relations with the United States and to make more concessions to the United States than they would have before, because undoubtedly they will their relations with the Chinese are going to be more strained by it, and that's going to mean that they will search for a solution with the United States more actively.
Do you see, Mr. Dudman, do you see this connected at all with the Vietnamese attempts through their negotiations with us in Paris to get us to give them the aid that they continue to claim Mr. Nixon promised them?
Well, I don't think that's a causal effect of this fighting at all. I don't see how it bears on it at all. They continue to say that they want a lot of massive aid that they say Nixon promised them, and that's a legal moral obligation, but I think that's quite independent of this border fighting.
Yeah. How do you see this war? I mean, do you agree with Mr. Porter that this war could actually have an effect on their foreign policy posture and make them more conciliatory towards us in those negotiations?
That could be. I can see that they feel a need for some closer alliance outside their country, some kind of additional friendship that would offset the troubles, the new troubles they've got, and that makes some sense.
Yeah, Mr. Poole, do you have a view on this?
I don't think that the United States has anywhere near as much need for relations with Vietnam as Vietnam has for relations with the United States, quite obviously, and I think it's clear that we're not going to give them aid. What it might do, I suppose, is make Vietnam more realistic. It might get them beyond the subject of worrying about the United States fulfilling Nixon's promises, if there are promises, and bartering for most favored nation economic treatment, along with normalization of relations. If that happened, that would be a step forward.
You said, John Alpert, that you found them in some straits economically, but the Vietnamese are famous for their self-sufficiency and being able to make things work. Did you sense them rather down psychologically at this time?
I sensed them in a very worried situation because they have a plan and they're right at the hair's edge of feeding all their people. And they expressed great fear that if they had to tie up their resources and their troops in a battle, and they had to clear out that whole border region from farmers, that they were going to have a very serious time in feeding their people, and they felt the Cambodians would have similar problems.
Okay, well, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Thank you all in Washington. Good night, Jim.
Hi, Robin.
That's all for tonight. Jim Lehrer and I'll be back tomorrow night. I'm Robert McNeil. Good night. Good evening. Millions of Americans were recently reminded by NBC television of the Nazi Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews were murdered. But during the years when it was actually happening, little was known outside Germany. Only when the death camps were liberated and the documents studied was the full measure of the genocide revealed. For a long time now, reports have been circulating of alleged genocide in Cambodia. In the worst accounts, some 2 million people are said to have been killed by the new communist regime. The government denies it, but the reports persist. In April, President Carter called Cambodia the worst violator of human rights in the world. Since they've kept the country virtually closed to foreign eyes, it's difficult to know the truth. But in recent months, some Americans and others have been trying systematically to find out. Tonight, what has happened in Cambodia? How do we know it? And what should be done about it? Jim?
Robin, Cambodia is remembered by most Americans as that other place besides Vietnam where the Indochina War was fought. It was the incursion into Cambodia by American troops in 1970 that triggered the Kent State tragedy and other anti-war violence here in the United States. In April 1975, 2 weeks before Vietnam fell to the communists, Cambodia did the same thing. The new rulers changed the country's name to Democratic Kampuchea and dropped a near airtight curtain of secrecy around them and their country. Since then, most of the information from there has come from refugees who have fled with stories of terror and genocide. It is known that Cambodia, Kampuchea, has been involved in border fighting with its communist neighbor, Vietnam, that its cities have been emptied of most of their population, which have been sent to the countryside to work the land, and that its new label as the most radically altered country in the world is probably correct. What is unknown and extremely difficult to find out is how many people may have died in that alteration process. Robin?
The Kampuchean government expelled all foreign journalists after they took power in 1975. One of the last American correspondents to be evacuated from the capital, Phnom Penh, before it fell, was Ed Bradley of CBS News. Bradley spent 2 years covering the war in Southeast Asia and has recently been trying to piece together what happened to Cambodia. A documentary with that title will be broadcast by CBS tomorrow night. Mr. Bradley, first, how difficult did you find it to get reliable information about Cambodia?
Very difficult, because you cannot get into the country. It's virtually impossible for most American journalists. Only a very small group of 4, Mr. Burstein, one of them, have been permitted into the country.
Did you try?
I tried through several sources. Something as simple and direct as handing a letter across the border was tried. We tried through third parties, ambassadors of friendly third nations acted as intermediaries. Not only were we not turned down, we had no reaction whatsoever from the Kampucheans.
Yeah. So you had no reaction at all, but you actually tried to cross the border at one point, didn't you?
I physically didn't try to cross the border. We had an emissary who handed a letter across the border to the Khmer Rouge.
And what happened then?
We don't even know what happened to the letter. I came as close as the border just to do portions of our program, and they shot at us then.
From the other side of the border?
From the other side. We were still on Thai territory.
Where, in fact, did you get most of your information?
Most of the information comes from refugees who have left the country, going to Thailand and to Vietnam. That's the overwhelming bulk of the information comes from refugee reports. It's also available from transcripts of broadcasts on Radio Phnom Penh. There are things that they have said which can corroborate other bits of information you have. We also have information from Cambodian journalists, Kampuchean ambassadors to other countries who have talked with other journalists and who have said, for instance, we have eliminated all of them. What do you mean by all of them? All of those who were trained in Hanoi, referring to a specific reference to the 5,000 or so Khmer cadre who were trained in Hanoi and then shipped down to fight the war. They admitted that they were eliminated. Over the radio, this has been corroborated. There have been reports of attempted coup d'etat. Pol Pot, the prime minister, has accused the Vietnamese of acts of espionage, subversion, infiltration, provocation, and coup d'etat. They have admitted that they've put those down.
So piecing all this jigsaw puzzle together from the sources you could assemble and trying to test it as best you could, what conclusion do you come to about the nature of the atrocity or even the genocide that is alleged in Cambodia? Did it happen?
Based on all of the information that we have, it's very difficult to arrive at any other conclusion. How severe? I think it's impossible to put numbers on it. But I would think any reasonable person would say that there's little doubt that there has been a tremendous amount of hardship and punishment meted out to that population.
Not necessarily deliberate murder or execution, but...
The evidence certainly points in that direction. It's difficult to reach any other conclusion. I would prefer to, rather than draw a conclusion for someone else, to have them watch all of the material we have assembled and all of the opinions we have assembled and reach their own conclusion.
Well, thank you. Jim?
President Carter's conclusion that Cambodia is the worst violator of human rights in the world was presumably based on information supplied him by the U.S. State Department. One of the department's major experts on Cambodia is Timothy Carney. He has been the Cambodia desk officer here in Washington and served in the U.S. Embassy in Cambodia for several years before that. He is the author of the recent book, Communist Party Power in Kampuchea. Mr. Carney, does your information on what's happening in Kampuchea jive with that Ed Bradley and CBS has come up with?
There's no question about it. Again, as Ed said, based on all the information available to us, and I'd just like to add one other source to that information. That includes defectors, party members and party candidate members who left Cambodia after a purge that began in April of 1977. There's no question that it is indeed a centrally directed policy to restructure Cambodian society, to alter Cambodian personality.
By mass genocide?
I would argue that it is by brutal, rapid change. Elements of that change include the murder of and mistreatment of senior officials of the previous regime, also similar treatment handed out to their families, and even to lower-ranking people.
Ed Bradley said he was a little reluctant to try to put any figures on the total number of people who have died in Cambodia since 1975. Are you reluctant to do so? Could you give us a ballpark figure on the number of deaths?
No, ever since I've been following Cambodia in the post-war period, have refused to give any figure. I don't think the information is good enough to do so. The most the administration says is hundreds of thousands, and that's the figure I'd like to stick with. Hundreds of thousands. How did you determine that it's at least hundreds of thousands? Based primarily on the refugee reports, the great number of them who come from all over the country, it could be no less than that. Does the U.S. government have any sources that are, say, not available to Ed Bradley and others who are seeking to find out what's going on in Cambodia? That you might not be able to tell us the sources, but do you have other sources besides the public ones? There are some other sources, but by far the bulk of information on what's happening in Cambodia comes either from refugees or from Radio Phnom Penh itself. Are all of the sources consistent? Do they all say the same thing, that yes, this is going on in that country? Yes, they do. All the ones that... what information on other aspects of life have you gotten just in terms of what it's like to live there now, above and beyond the fear of death, or those who may not be in fear of death, but who are just living there? Life is very hard. Most people, almost all people, are out in the fields, working a long day. I believe there's a day of rest, 1 in every 10, that since I believe it was January of 1977, meals began to be taken communally, that the youngsters are entrusted to the old people, such that are left to be reared while the adults are out working, that teenagers are formed into mobile brigades for both ideological instruction and for work projects. Finally, the comparison has been made to the Nazi Holocaust. Is this an act of one fanatic a la Hitler, or is it different? Basically, the effort to restructure the Cambodian society is from the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Kampuchea, from the basically French-trained intellectuals who have been running Cambodia on the communist side since, let's say, 1970-71. The policies that we're seeing today were laid down during the war. I think if I can fix on a year, I'd say by 1973, what we are seeing today had been firmly established in the liberated zones in Cambodia proper, specifically the collectivization of agriculture, the institution of very harsh penalties for infractions of the many rules and regulations, requirements for travel passes, move back and forth, and state control of the economy. All right. Thank you. Robin?
A number of private organizations have been working to assist the new wave of refugees from Southeast Asia, and one such group is the International Rescue Committee, headed by LİCH, who recently visited Thailand to visit Cambodian refugees. Mr. Chern, you have condemned the Kampuchean government for running what you call the Auschwitz of Asia. On what facts do you base that condemnation?
Well, we've already heard on a wide array of sources. In addition to those sources, there are additional ones which have not been mentioned. There's the very interesting fact that several months ago, three Scandinavian ambassadors of their respective countries to Peiping, requested permission to visit the ruins at Angkor Wat and to see and visit Phnom Penh. They were given an opportunity briefly to stay in Phnom Penh. They passed through the previously large town Siem Reap. The reports of these Scandinavian ambassadors is dramatic. A city which had at one point 3 million people, they estimate has now no more than 20,000. As ambassadors, they are struck by the fact that 8 communist governments and 1 non-communist government, Egypt is the only non-communist government, permitted an ambassador. These ambassadors from communist governments are literally prisoners in their homes. Meals as well as papers are delivered to them.
Well, that could argue a totalitarian regime or a strong authoritarian regime with a desire to restructure the country and perhaps simply to move the people out of the city. Is it proof that those people who have been moved out have actually been killed?
All right, now the remaining source, which in my case is the primary source, being the chairman of an organization which is concerned with some 15,000 Cambodian refugees in 4 camps in Thailand, having interviewed at length more than 3,000 of those refugees, we're just struck by this unbelievable phenomenon that there is this reluctance to believe the consistent stories people tell coming from areas which are distant from each other. The same phenomenon occurred in 1938, 39, 1940, and 41 in the case of Nazi Germany.
What kind of stories do they tell? Can you give us an example briefly of the manner in which these killings that are alleged took place?
Fascinatingly, the manner of the killing is usually with a blow of the hoe on the head, or the head chopped off with an axe. Only when large numbers are to be killed are rifle bullets used. In all cases, the young people are used to do the killing.
Does your organization believe that these apparent atrocities were in a wave of post-revolutionary fervor or are a continuing process in the country?
I believe, regrettably, that there must be some diminution of the killings. Let me explain the word regrettably. Because regrettably, the particular groups who were singled out for elimination, the teachers, the monks, the professionals, any with education. Pol Pot, incidentally, the head of government, made a 5.5-hour speech in Peiping when he visited China a month ago with some of the most remarkable revelations, including, incidentally, a disparity in the population of Cambodia when Khieu Samphan, who was his right hand, was asked, what is the population of Cambodia? He said 5 million.
And it used
the population of Cambodia used to be 8 million.
Do the lives of Cambodians, how do the lives of Cambodians now compare, in the view of your committee, with what they used to be before the communists?
You know, on that I would like to cite, if I might, someone very sympathetic to the Khmer Rouge, a Catholic priest, Francois Panchot, who has written, until next month, it is available only in French. It will be published here as Cambodia Year Zero in July. He was sympathetic to the revolution. He speaks very eloquently of the exploitation at the hands of the Sihanouk regime, at the disappointments at the hand of the Lan No regime. He was delighted when the government was overthrown, as were many of the people.
And what does he say?
Having interviewed over 300 refugees in detail, more than 2,000 others by correspondence, having studied all the evidence, he says the estimate that more than 100,000 Khmers have been executed must be taken as an absolute minimum. It is possible that 2 or 3 times as many have been executed. The number who have died because of lack of food or of medical or sanitary facilities and from the frantic pace of work may well be more than 2 million. I had reports of villages in which 1/3, 1/2, and even 9/10 of the population have died. And let me say that among those who do make it to the few camps in Thailand, the estimate is that only 1 in 5 who make that difficult effort to escape, only 1 in 5 make it. The other 4 die or are killed along the road.
Mr. Chern, thank you. Jim?
All right, the only Americans the new government has allowed inside Kampuchea since 1975 was a group of U.S. communists, the group Ed Bradley mentioned ago. There were 4 of them in the delegation, which spent 8 days there in April. The delegation was headed by Daniel Burstein, editor of the Communist Party Marxist-Leninist newspaper, The Call, which is published in Chicago. Has there been genocide committed in Kampuchea by the new government?
No, I think the term genocide is completely inappropriate when applied to the situation since the liberation in 1975. If you want to talk about genocide, I think you should talk about the 800,000 Kampucheans who were slaughtered by the U.S.-backed Lan No regime and through the U.S.-backed war in the early years from 1970 to 75.
All right. Have there been in excess of hundreds of thousands of Kampucheans die since the communist regime took over in 1975?
I don't believe so. I believe that it's a difficult question to answer exactly in numbers, and I think The U.S. State Department reports bear out that the situation in Phnom Penh at the time of liberation, April 17th, 1975, was such that 300 people a day were dying of starvation in the city, not to mention how many were dying of starvation in the countryside. Obviously that problem wasn't solved overnight, but now that problem has been solved.
All right, well, let me ask you this. When you were in Kampuchea, did you ask the leaders about these reports about the mass deaths in Kampuchea?
Yes, I did.
What did they say?
They said that these reports have been grossly exaggerated, wildly fabricated, and they gave us evidence and information about a network of misinformation and disinformation in which several of the old Lan Nol clique officials are involved, a network that's organized in Bangkok and elsewhere in Thailand, backed heavily by the CIA, and that is engaged in the business of disseminating misinformation about the situation in Kampuchea.
Well, do you think what we've heard from Mr. Carney, Mr. Chern, and Ed Bradley is a result of that network of misinformation?
I think quite a number of the facts that have been mentioned and the sources that have been cited are precisely the work of that network.
What is your evidence on the other side?
Sorry?
What is your evidence to prove the other side of the coin, that there has not, that these things have
the
not
evidence
happened?
is, first of all, what I could see with my own eyes and what I could talk to people about and interview and carry out discussions with Kampuchean people in the countryside and in the cities, as well as talks with government leaders. And we talked to average people. We got off the road, we got way out in the countryside, got out of our car, and just went out and found people to interview, tape recorded our interviews, and subsequently corroborated the authenticity of the Kampuchean language translation that was given to us.
Well, how do you explain then the stories from the refugees? In Mr. Chern's case, I believe he said that his group had interviewed 3,000, and the stories were very consistent. Mr. Carney says that the information that's come to the State Department has all said exactly the same thing, no matter where the sources come from.
I think that there's no doubt that there are some people who are very dissatisfied with the revolution in Kampuchea. In fact, in Pol Pot's speech, which he gave explaining the history of the Communist Party of Kampuchea and the present situation there, he explained that there are 1 or 2% of the population who is not very favorable to the revolution. Naturally, Lan Nol had quite a group of people in his employ, the Khmer Sarai, the organization sponsored by the CIA to carry out the activities up to and leading up to the coup d'etat in 1970, had thousands of members in it. I think it's also not unexpected, as in every revolution. There are some excesses, there are some mistakes, and perhaps some of these things are being seized on and blown up out of proportion by the Khmer Sarai and the CIA and their cohorts in Thailand to pass off this information.
In a word, in your heart of hearts, you believe that none of this that these three gentlemen have said has actually gone on?
I say that I think in the course of revolutionary upheaval, that's not to say there's no violence.
Mm-hmm.
There have been 4 attempted coup d'etats in the last 3 years. The CIA and the KGB have both tried to overthrow the present regime in Kampuchea. That situation can't be resolved without the use of violence. But that's, I think, understandable in the context of a revolution.
All right. In other words, if it has gone on, it's been justified.
I would say so, with the exception of some excesses and mistakes that were even pointed out to us by the Kampuchean leaders.
All right. Thank you. Robin?
Yes, let's pursue Mr. Bernstein's points a moment. Mr. Chern, refugees can be differently motivated, and they can be bad witnesses on occasion. How do you know in this case they are not?
Let me say refugees are always differently motivated because it does take a special kind of spirit, including courage, to risk one's life in order to seek freedom. Of course they're differently motivated. But this business of questioning this particular group of refugees by standards of doubt, which we wouldn't dream of applying to Chilean refugees whom the IRC is aiding, or Haitian refugees whom the IRC is aiding, or Kurdish refugees whom the IRC is aiding, or Russian Jews whom the IRC is aiding. This is a perfectly extraordinary unwillingness to believe something of which there is so much detail. And incidentally, one of the fascinating things about Mr. Bernstein's comment was he cited these sources, these conspiratorial sources, KGB cooperating with the CIA and Lan Nol's forces. Well, how does one account for this kind of language from Radio Hanoi? I mean, they were involved together in this war. Radio Hanoi describes a midnight Khmer Rouge attack on a Vietnamese village, and it says all of the houses were surrounded by Cambodian soldiers who immediately opened fire, used machetes, axes, sabers, sharpened slicks to slay the villagers. A fleeing child was caught by a soldier who cut off his leg and threw him into the flames. All 7 members of Mrs. Trong's family were beheaded. Rot was disemboweled, had a 7-month fetus placed on her chest, and so on and so on. And let me say, Radio Phnom Penh is just as vivid in its descriptions of the infinite plotting that is taking place on the part of its communist neighbors to the right. In fact, nothing reminds me as much of the rivalry between the Russians and the Nazis in the Nazi-Soviet pact as do these two at each other's throats.
Thank you. Ed Bradley, what's your comment on the allegation that there is a disinformation network at work spreading these allegations?
I don't have any doubts that there's some element of truth in it. The American government has been involved for years in Indochina. The CIA was involved in Indochina. It would be stupid of them not to make an effort to maintain their ties there, however they can. But I don't think, when you count the weight of evidence, the numbers of refugees, throw out, as Father Ponchot said in our interview, all of those who speak French. Throw out all of the Cambodians who speak English. Talk only to simple peasants who've worked the land all of their lives, who come from different parts of the country. Some have escaped to Thailand, others have escaped to Vietnam. They tell essentially the same story, and you hear it too often to disbelieve it.
Thank you. Jim?
Mr. Carney, is there anything that the United States government can do other than to do what President Carter has done, is just say it's terrible?
Basically, we have a responsibility to cry out in the face of the situation in Cambodia. What we can do is very limited. We supported, for example, the initiative which the British began in the UN Human Rights Subcommission in Geneva in February. We will continue to support international efforts to bring the Cambodian authorities to realize that they must change their behavior.
But that's it.
That is it. We have no leverage on Cambodia. We give no aid. In fact, it's precluded by law. We have no diplomatic relations.
Mr. Burstein, did you ask the Kampuchean leaders why they would not let the Ed Bradleys of this world, the Western newsmen and other people into the country and actually check these stories out for themselves?
Yes, I did. And I think the situation there is, you have to understand, it's a country devastated by war. And when the word devastated, you have to understand what that means. A country where there's hardly a road that you can go 100 meters on without coming across a bomb crater. There's hardly any buildings in many cities and many provincial capitals that are intact anymore. The whole agricultural system was destroyed by U.S. bombing. Virtually destroyed the entire agricultural system.
I read today, for instance, I did not realize that 500,000 pounds of American bombs, so tons were dropped during the 6 years. Yes, but go ahead, excuse me.
So they have a lot of work to do. Pol Pot said in his September 1977 speech that we're able to receive more and more friends each year, and as we get our house in order, we'll be able to receive more people.
But if they have nothing to hide, the basic question when it comes right down to it is, if they have nothing to hide, then why don't they let people come in and see for themselves?
Well,
Besides
they do.
A small group
First of all,
of very sympathetic people who are sympathetic to them, as you are.
They do, and I should mention here that Chern's reference to the Scandinavian diplomats is completely off base. Actually, they came back with many favorable impressions of their trip, including the Swedish diplomat Oberg in particular. And immediately after he released his findings, which included some criticisms as well as some favorable remarks about the situation there, the Swedish government insisted that he had no right to make this trip and went completely without the authority of the Swedish government.
Sorry, we have to go. Robin?
Yeah, thank you all of you for joining us this evening. That's all the time we have tonight. And if you're interested in pursuing this further, you might like to watch the CBS documentary Mr. Bradley made, which is on tomorrow night. That's all for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night. I'm Robert McNeil. Good night. Good evening. Communist China charged today that Vietnam, with Soviet support, was fighting a full-scale war of conquest in Cambodia, now called Kampuchea. The charge appeared in China's official newspaper, the People's Daily, as the Cambodian government radio reported fighting on 8 fronts all along the border with Vietnam. And the Cambodians charged that the Vietnamese planes were carrying out bombing raids within 35 miles of the capital, Phnom Penh. According to Vietnam, the fighting is by Cambodian rebels, the Kampuchean United Front for the National Salvation, set up last month. Yesterday, that front claimed to have captured 3 provincial capitals, including the port city of Kratie on the Mekong River. The Cambodian government has asked the United Nations Security Council to meet, and the Carter administration says it supports that request. The heavier fighting has coincided with the decision by Cambodia to open their hidden country to Western eyes for the first time since the communists took over there nearly 4 years ago. Tonight, inside Cambodia. Jim?
Robin, Cambodia, the new Democratic Republic of Kampuchea, has been virtually sealed off from the outside world for nearly 4 years, since April 1975, when the old U.S.-backed government fell to the communists. Most of the information since has come from refugees who told stories of forced evacuation, of atrocities, of mass genocide. Some estimates said 2 million people had died, many of them murdered since the communists took over. Kampuchea officials occasionally denied such reports, but for the most part, the questions and the criticisms from the rest of the world were ignored. But as the armed hostilities with Vietnam have heated up, Kampuchea has begun to open up, primarily to claim the Vietnamese are seeking to take over their country by force, all with the backing and support of the Soviet Union. That Soviet element, of course, gives a big picture tinge to what otherwise might be seen as 2 centuries-old enemies settling some ancient scores. The Chinese are supporting the Kampucheans, thus the prospect of a major confrontation between the communist world's 2 superpowers over the Cambodia fighting. The opening up of Cambodia has included the invitation to UN Secretary General Kurt Waldheim to visit, allowing tourists to visit the ancient temple ruins at Angkor, among other things. The most recent, the most dramatic step was the admission of 2 American journalists, Elizabeth Becker of the Washington Post and Richard Dudman of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. They have just returned from 2 weeks in Cambodia and are with us tonight. First, Ms. Becker, on the war, did you get the impression that the Kampucheans, the Cambodians, see this as a real fight for their survival, or is all of this just rhetoric?
At first, it seemed as if it was mostly rhetoric. We, in our tour, which was a very carefully guided tour, we saw very, very few signs of war unless we were near the border, and we visited the border exactly once and closer to the border in the south. Otherwise, it seemed anything but a country going through an overall military preparedness. But every day, whenever we tried to venture out on our own, we were told that to do so would endanger us because they were a country at war. So we didn't take it seriously. But since it was constant and since it was underlined in every talk we had with an official, I think it's deep-seated, and I think it was far beyond rhetoric, and the events since have proved that's the case.
Yeah. Is that your impression too, Dick Dudman?
Well, I think they were taken by surprise by this new offensive. They told us repeatedly that the offensive of a year ago was a very serious one, that they beat them back in the great victory of last January 6th, and that the buildup of the Vietnamese along the border was only about 1/4 of what it was at that time. And they spoke very confidently that all there were a few probing actions.
Mm-hmm. Well, Elizabeth, you said that there was no, for instance, here's a picture that of somebody explaining to you. Is that a typical war room picture? Was this part of a briefing?
No, that's a shot taken inside the old headquarters of Lon Nol's army, and it's now a museum. And this man is pointing out how the communists won in 1975.
I see, but that has no relationship. Now here, a picture you took
on the border.
On the border.
2 kilometers from the border at Krek.
Yeah. I mean, you were not allowed to actually be on the front lines themselves, right?
No, they would not. We came within 2 kilometers, and all we could hear were the planes over us and the sound of artillery.
Yeah.
But we saw no fighting.
Dick, did you get any feeling for the state of military strength or readiness of the Cambodians to fight a major war with Vietnam?
Not really. We got some indication of the Chinese assistance, which we know from other sources is important. We heard 2 MiGs go overhead in Phnom Penh one day near the end of our visit. They are, we understand, part of the Chinese gift or sale or whatever of, I understand, about 40 MiGs.
Mm-hmm. Was there any other outward signs of the Chinese presence?
No, and I think that was on purpose. However, when we flew down, we came the only way you can, through Peking, and our flight was overwhelmingly filled with Chinese, and the same on the way back.
Yeah.
But once we were there, they more or less disappeared from our sight. I have no idea, you know, how many there are, where they are, what they're doing, by my own experience.
What up near the border? Did you see any up there with the what military forces you did see?
No.
No,
No, and it's a point they came back to, that Chinese are not acting as advisors. They accused the Vietnamese of having Soviet advisors and Soviet pilots, and they wanted to make a point that they did not have Chinese. So if the Chinese were acting any way like that, we would not have seen it.
Yeah. Well, look, both of the two of you barely escaped with your lives in that terrorist attack in Phnom Penh, and a British political economist traveling with you was killed. Did you get the impression, Dick, that that attack was somehow tied in with the war in any way?
Well, I don't know. Either that or with a domestic faction that wanted to make this government look bad. It could have been either source. I think their explanation that this was an effort to show that they could not protect important guests is probably the correct one, but beyond that it's hard to say.
I mean, you don't think it was a setup of some kind by the government, that it was a legitimate terrorist attack?
I think you'd have to be a terribly cynical person to think that.
Yeah.
Humanly, it's impossible for me to imagine that.
Yeah. Was there any question on that night that the gunman or the gunmen, apparently that's still unclear, is it not, as to how many were there, how many terrorists actually came?
Now, Dick had a different view than I did. I saw only one. Dick, however, was on the second floor, and he could answer how many people were outside the house, because he had a view to the front gate and the road in front of us. But I saw only one, and we were told that at least 3 were involved. The gunman who probably killed Dr. Caldwell.
Yeah.
And
here's a picture of Dr. Caldwell with a Cambodian official.
That's the foreign minister.
Foreign minister, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Was there any question that those people came to kill all 3 of you? I mean, it was...
I have a lot of questions about that, and I don't know.
What is your major question? What did you come away? What was your major question about it?
My major question is why Dick and I survived. Because both of us were threatened by the gunman before Dr. Caldwell was. And we were both in clear range, and we were not... well, I wasn't shot at. Dick was shot at, but he missed...
Dick, what's your feeling on that? Did you have the feeling that the gunman that came to you and fired at you was trying to kill you, or was he looking for Caldwell, or what? What's your impression?
I'm not sure. I know he was trying to shoot at me, but I had the impression at first that he was motioning me out of the way. I shouldn't have been out in the hall at all, and he took this shot at me and then fired 2 shots through the door. I have no doubt he was trying to get me, but his major target could well have been Caldwell, who was known as a friend of Cambodia. We were there as reporters.
Those are questions, all the questions about this are questions that'll probably never be answered too, right, Elizabeth? Is that it?
Well, we asked that a report be sent us, but I haven't heard anything from the government.
Yeah. All right. Robin?
Richard, if you can leave aside your harrowing experiences, I guess it must have been, what are your general impressions of the new Kampuchea, which has undergone an incredible upheaval, we understand, as a country?
I was not prepared to find a country that, people that looked as well fed as they did. I didn't see any signs of malnutrition, certainly not starvation. I didn't see back-breaking hard work. It was comparable to what our grandfathers used to do in farms in the United States. They worked long hours, but so did they.
I've read from your stories that you went, as I guess any reporter would, with uppermost in your mind trying to find some evidence for the stories that we've been reading for the last 2 years of mass executions, as many as 2 million people having perhaps been eliminated, and that you were able to find no evidence for that. Is that so? For or against the stories?
Yes, it was a very hard thing to get at. We thought of various ways to do it. We asked to see any prisons that they had. They said they had no prisons. We asked to see re-education camps, which they acknowledged they had. We weren't given an opportunity. We asked about their system of justice. We were told that they had people's courts and that the National Justice Organization, the ministry, did no more than ratify the findings of people's courts. Now that has an ominous sound.
What kind of sentences did those courts mete out?
Well, they wouldn't tell, but you can imagine, in the heat of one of the most extreme revolutions that the world has seen, that there must have been a lot of death sentences. I have no doubt of that myself.
What was the attitude of the officials you asked when you asked them point blank, what happened to all those people? Are these atrocity stories true?
They resented it, and they kept asking, in connection with the evacuation of Phnom Penh also, they'd ask why we were so interested in a small minority of the people. They said that what they were more interested in was the 80% or 90%, they used various percentages, of people that they said were ground down peasants before, whose lot had improved.
Well, after all the changes, you've brought some photographs back that you took there, and we have some of them here. After all the changes that there have been, for instance, how is the agriculture organized now? And we've read that people have been driven into the countryside to look after the agriculture. How does it appear to be organized?
Well, they literally are driven. You see them being carried around by truck all the time, and walking to work in the fields. They get up at 5 and go to work either by truck or walking. At 7 o'clock every morning.
A lot of women in there, I noticed.
Women and little children, too. Long lines of little children carrying firewood.
And this is a shot inside one of their factories. How does the state of their economy look in terms of industrialization now?
Well, it's pretty primitive. We saw some sophisticated plants. This textile plant where they're wearing face masks to prevent white lung, it looked like a reasonably efficient, fairly modern plant for a backward country, using Chinese machines that had been put in 1967. The rubber plant that we saw was fairly modern. It seemed to produce a good quality product for export in large quantity.
But other aspects you have picture here, what is that?
Well, that's a blacksmith shop, and it's very primitive. They're making all their own tools, and there's a fellow on a bicycle operating a bellows for the forges, and they're hammering out, I think that's a hatchet head probably.
Yeah. But this sort of thing wouldn't be uncommon in many parts of Southeast Asia, would it? Especially more rural and less advanced parts.
Well, as the principal way of producing tools, I think it's unusually primitive.
It is unusually primitive, is it? Yeah. And what about, you say they didn't look underfed to you. What about things like housing? You have some pictures here of...
Housing is the most dramatic single thing I saw in the way of upgrading the life of the peasants. I happen to have stayed in some of those houses some years back, in the peasant houses, the grass shacks. They very quickly get rat and mice infested and bugs and things and go to pieces in a hurry. Now they're building them of lumber, hand sawed right there on the site, and they have cement footings, concrete footings that keep the stilts up out of the mud so that they won't go to pieces with termites. They're somewhat larger, these houses are very simple, no kitchen, there's no home cooking in Cambodia now. They all eat in mess halls. That's one of the big changes, but they live in individual families in their houses.
So you would score their revolution with some upgrading of the standard of peasant life, would you?
Some
at
upgrading,
least materially.
but a lot of regimentation.
I see. Now, everybody in the West, if they know anything about Cambodia, has heard of the temples, the famous ancient temples at Angkor Wat, and I believe you went by them and have a picture, and there's been a lot of concern in the West that they would be desecrated or destroyed or anything. What condition did you find them in?
We spent 2 days there and had a pretty good look at them. They're not in bad condition. There was one place where they've been shelled during the war. There was another place where very recently a tree fell down in one corner of one of the temples.
Are they being maintained?
Not at all. That's a low priority thing, and they will go to pieces. We saw plants growing up from between the cracks of the masonry of the stones, and that gradually will cause it to tumble down. We saw lichens growing on them. We saw bat dung in some places that corrodes the surface, and it does take some maintenance, and it's not getting the maintenance it needs. They speak of doing it in the future, but they haven't begun yet.
All right, we'll come back. Jim?
All right, Ms. Becker, yours was a special perspective. You'd been the Washington Post's resident correspondent in Phnom Penh for 2 years, 73, 74. In general terms, what change struck you the most?
The first change was that, oddly enough, that it was no longer at war. It was a shock that to go into the cities and to the countryside and not see any sign of war. The barbed wire is gone, the military equipment is gone, at least from what I could see. But that was the most superficial beginning. The main impression that was so strange was the way of life. Mm-hmm. There are very few people. I didn't see the people gathering together in a market or in a pagoda. It just seems that the whole rhythm had changed, and it was a different country in that respect.
Different country in what way?
When Cambodia before, first of all, there were a lot of people who lived in cities and provincial capitals. When the Cambodians talked to us about how the 90% of the population had formerly been peasants, that's not true. They're a much larger percentage than they would admit used to live in the cities and live in the market towns. And that life, which we all take for granted, the ability to go down and gossip in the marketplace, buy some fruit juice, have your children go to a pagoda for education, go visit the monk if you have a problem. That whole village life was gone, and the city life, of course, was gone.
Were you able to get any line on this question of genocide of the 2 million people allegedly who died there?
Certainly not by direct questions. A direct question would lead to a lecture on how irresponsible we are for caring only about a small number of people. I asked if there were elements of society that the government considered so corrupt that they couldn't integrate them. You know, a sanitized way of asking, you know, if, for instance, you thought all the officers of the army were beyond redemption. And I got a strange answer to it. We went about looking for clues by looking for people from the city. And when Phnom Penh at the end of the war was almost, well, it was between 2 million and 3 million people, out of a population estimated at the most around 6 million at the end of the war. That's half the people. Yet in our travel we met two.
2 people who said they had come from Phnom Penh.
And that was a...
were you able to talk to them?
Yeah.
Did you ask them, hey, did they force you to do this? Did any of your people?
Yeah.
What did they say?
No, it was all voluntary, they said.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Did you ask them about mass killings and that sort of thing?
Yes, they knew nothing about it.
They knew nothing about it.
They told a very small little personal story about what they did during the war and then how they voluntarily went to a cooperative and since then were made part of the cooperative. One man told us it took him 2 years to win the confidence of the cooperative.
You must have come away with some kind of impression in your heart of hearts or your gut of guts about whether or not those mass killings took place. What is it?
I'll tell you what first triggered it, the opinion. We went to a dinner given us by the foreign minister, Yang Suri. And first he chastised us for not asking enough questions about the war with Vietnam. Then, in the middle of his talk, this is before dinner, he gave an impromptu answer to the questions he must have known we've been asking. He said something like about these so-called massacres and slaughters. And now I'm paraphrasing. He said, about these killings, our Communist Party solved this problem in the best way. And if we hadn't taken the route we had, it would have been worse. Which I took as an admission that yes, in fact, there were killings, and it had to do with the radical change in the country.
Were there signs of mass graves or anything like that?
No.
Yeah.
Nothing at all.
Yeah. What is your feeling about the agricultural move, the forced evacuation, as it's called? Is that working?
Working.
The agricultural part?
Well, working, first, in their minds, it works if they become self-sufficient. So if you can agree that a goal is to be totally self-sufficient, not to depend on other countries, which is so radical that it's almost incomprehensible for us. Our world is so interconnected. So they believe it's working. These crude foundries.
Is there an ideological basis for the primitiveness of their workplace, so to speak?
It is so that they can truly consider themselves independent, self-sufficient, and never having to rely on another country. They're the most extreme reaction against a small country in a developing stage deciding that they can't trust a great power. Even though they rely quite a bit on China, it seems to me that they've gone out of their way to build this up themselves, regardless of the cost for the people.
Okay, thank you. Robin?
Yes, considering the social upheaval that Cambodia has undergone, which must be more extreme in a sense than any other revolutionary country has, how is that apparent to you as a visitor who has been there before during the war, covering the war there? Is it a nightmarish place for the people who survived to live in, or is all that behind them now?
It must be a very restricted place. Nightmare? I don't think so. It seemed to me we saw people who had a degree of spontaneity, children playing, people turning around and maybe yelling or smiling or laughing to see the strange sight of seeing three Westerners go past in a Mercedes-Benz. I didn't see it as nightmarish.
Elizabeth, did you get the same feeling?
First, I was taken aback by seeing all these Cambodians in black pajamas and the women in black sarongs. And I started to get all those reactions when you think, oh, I'm now in a country that's communist and everybody's robots. But as soon as I started speaking to them, saying Saksabai or explaining to them in their language who I am, they're Cambodians again. And they smiled and they reacted to me.
Yeah. How is it organized? You gave us a small insight a moment ago, and you said that they have homes and new homes, but the peasants eat in sort of communal eating arrangements. Is the basic structure of society or the unit of society still the family, or has the party intervened?
No, it's the co-op. These are really communal groups. They can be very large, up to 100,000 people. But then there's subdivisions that eat together and so on. Is it your impression it is more regimented than life in China, for instance? I think so. More regimented, more disciplined? I think so.
Elizabeth, what do you think the revolution has achieved? You who knew Cambodia quite well up to a few years ago. Has it any positive achievements?
Again, within their context. It's very hard to compare the old with the new, because what the other society was working towards, this one is not. In the sense that during the war I saw quite a few beggars and quite a few people who were very poor, and malnutrition was a tremendous problem at the end of the war. Yeah, they fed their people, they're housed in their clothes. However, I did not know Cambodian peace before. I did not know it under Siem.
Do you think this is a regime, Pol Pot's regime, the premier, that the United States should have diplomatic relations with?
We
don't at the moment.
I don't think we ought to rush into it, but my own view is that that the regime, well, I don't know how stable they are. I think that there really has to be an appraisal to see that they're a lasting regime, and these hostilities that are going on right now may well determine that. If they do last, I should think that it would be good to recognize them as a way of bringing them more into the family of nations. For so long they didn't want that. Now at least they want it, and we could help bring them out a little bit.
Elizabeth, do you have a view on that finally? The State Department, in saying that we supported the idea of an appeal to the Security Council yesterday, also stuck in the line that we still abhor the human rights situation there. Would we have to swallow something horrendous to recognize them?
Well, I think within the, I'm not that well versed on the way that the human rights policy affects recognitions of countries, and I'm confused on that. But I generally, as an American, you know, I can't oppose recognition of any country, I don't think.
I see. And how long would you give the present regime, given the war situation and everything? Do you think we're looking at something very temporary?
It's very unstable, I'd say.
We'll have to end it there. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for joining us. Good night, Jim.
Good night, Robin.
Thank you, Richard. That's all for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night. I'm Robert McNeil. Good night. Good evening. As you know from today's headlines, the government of Cambodia, or Kampuchea as they call it, was overthrown yesterday in one of the shortest wars in modern history. After a 13-day campaign, Cambodian rebels, backed by units of the Vietnamese army, seized the capital, Phnom Penh, and today claimed control over most of the country. Pol Pot, the Cambodian premier, fled with his government. They're now believed to hold a small corner in the northwest near the town of Siem Reap. He was immediately replaced by a revolutionary council headed by a defector from his own government, Heng Samrin. The new leaders claimed they would restore democratic rights and Cambodian traditions, including the Buddhist religion, which had been erased in Pol Pot's drastic program of forced ruralization. The swift change in the situation split the world's two leading communist nations. Vietnam's allies in Moscow hailed the victory as a liberation, while Peking, which supports Cambodia, deplored the Vietnamese takeover. The situation has deeply alarmed the countries of Southeast Asia. The impact was immediately felt in neighboring Thailand, which received scores of foreign diplomats escaping from Phnom Penh. Here's a report today from Viz News reporter Mark Leff in Thailand.
Within a few hours of the announcement that Phnom Penh had fallen to the rebel forces, the district officer's compound at the Thai border village of Aranya Pratet was crammed with hundreds of foreign embassy staff and Chinese technicians. They'd started coming across the border from neighboring Battambang province at first light. Thai officials said most of those who crossed the border were Chinese, including China's ambassador to Kampuchea, but that the refugees also included nearly 50 North Koreans who objected strongly to being filmed, plus 7 Burmese, 2 Yugoslavs, 1 Egyptian, and 1 Romanian. There has been no official word on the whereabouts of Kampuchean Prime Minister Pol Pot and other leaders of his government. In Bangkok, Thai Prime Minister Kriangsak Chamanan says they may still be in the country, perhaps on the west bank of the Mekong River, where fighting continues. The Thai military commander in the Aranya Pratet border area said his forces were maintaining their full normal military alert and that some units had been strengthened. Thai officials say the Khmer Rouge government flag hasn't flown for 2 or 3 days on the other side of the border. The Thai prime minister said he didn't think either Vietnamese or Kampuchean forces would try to set foot on Thai soil and said he would not allow anyone to use Thai territory as a base. Mark Leff reporting.
The situation also creates a delicate problem for the United States. The Carter administration appealed today to both Moscow and Peking not to intervene militarily. Tonight, the meaning and the consequences of Vietnam's blitzkrieg in Cambodia. Jim Lehrer is off. Charlene Hunter-Galtz in Washington. Charlene?
Robin, as the military situation against the Vietnamese deteriorated, the Pol Pot government struggled to win international support. In a last-ditch effort, the Kampuchean government freed former head of state Norodom Sihanouk, who had been held under house arrest for the past 3 years. Prince Sihanouk was flown to Peking en route to a hoped-for appearance before the United Nations Security Council. Upon his arrival at Peking, Prince Sihanouk perhaps the best-known Cambodian on the international scene, held an extraordinary 5-hour press conference where his criticism of Vietnamese foreign policy was matched, perhaps even overshadowed, by his passionate criticism of Pol Pot's domestic policies.
To see my people having such rights, you know, because they are basic rights for humanity, basic rights. Only basic rights, not so many rights, but only basic rights. And the rights to love and to be loved. The right to choose freely your wife and to be with your wife and your children all the time. And not to be separate, you know. I do not approve of the internal policy of Pol Pot. No, I do not approve of his internal policy, his policy of violation of human rights. But his external policy is good. His determination to defend our territorial integrity and national dignity, national independence is good. I approve of it. I will continue to support him. I have to be frank. I speak only about basic rights. Only basic rights, the most elementary rights for humanity, because we are not just animals, you know, like buffaloes or oxen to make rice. We make rice, but we have not to be like oxen and buffaloes, but a little better, if possible, if possible. And as far as myself is concerned, I am disgusted. Yes, disgusted. Dégoûté with the political life. I am not liked by the Lemelites. I am not liked by the Pol Pot team. I am very hated. I do not want to be involved again in the governmental affairs of my country. But as a citizen, as a patriot, I will speak out against the Vietnamese aggressors.
Sihanouk is expected to press his case at the United Nations. He is reportedly scheduled to arrive there Tuesday night. But following his news conference today, the prince wondered aloud whether Pol Pot's regime would still want him to continue as its representative abroad after hearing his comments. One historian who has followed the centuries-old conflict between Cambodia and Vietnam is Gareth Porter. Mr. Porter, who has made several trips to Vietnam, the most recent in November, is now working on a book about the future of international politics in Southeast Asia. Mr. Porter, I should have said, as the military situation against the Cambodians deteriorated a few moments ago. But my first question to you is, why did the Vietnamese invade Cambodia?
Well, I think several things happened in 1978. And you may recall early in the year when the war really first began, in late 1977 and early 78, the Vietnamese made a lightning thrust into Cambodia and then pulled back and offered a truce proposal to the Cambodian regime, which was turned down, which would have had both sides withdraw their forces 5 miles behind the accepted boundary between the two countries and have an international inspection force to keep them from fighting again. That was in February of '78. Since then, several things have happened. First of all, the Vietnamese have recognized the Chinese for the first time officially as their main enemy. And this is a breathtaking development in Vietnamese internal politics as well as foreign policy. And that meant that they began to treat Cambodia as only one part of a larger picture in which they felt the Chinese were out to threaten Vietnamese security. And I think they became really paranoid about the Chinese intentions and saw China using Cambodian attacks against Vietnam as a way of opening up another front against Vietnam. And another thing that happened was I think the Vietnamese began to feel that there were enough defections from the Cambodian party, high leaders as well as middle echelon and low-ranking military and political people, that they could put together a government which could be a front, precisely as they came out in November with a front to oppose the present, at that time, the Pol Pot government in Cambodia. So they had both negative and positive incentives for changing their policy from that at the beginning of the year.
Was there any magic in this particular time for them to strike?
Well, obviously they were waiting for precisely the right moment, and it seems that this was tied very much to U.S.-Chinese relations. They chose the moment almost immediately after normalization was announced, the intention to normalize at the beginning of the year. And it seems to me they wanted to have their coup against the Pol Pot government take place before the U.S.-Chinese strategic alliance, even if it was not an official alliance yet, was really consolidated.
Right. All right. We'll come back. Thank you. Robin?
Information on the fighting and the present situation has been hard to come by. Western military and intelligence analysts have been piecing it together from the claims of both sides and from some independent intelligence data. One of the reporters in touch with that world is William Beecher, diplomatic correspondent of the Boston Globe. Mr. Beecher, does Western intelligence confirm the extent of the victory against Pol Pot?
Absolutely. It was surprisingly sweeping and complete as far as seen from a distance.
And do they know how much regular force Vietnamese units, or how many regular force Vietnamese units were used?
The estimate is that around 100,000 Vietnamese forces, along with 20,000 front irregulars, were used in this campaign.
Supported by tanks and aircraft, I've
Tanks and aircraft, including a lot of aircraft that were captured from South Vietnamese and American forces when that effort collapsed a couple of years ago.
Just as a matter of curiosity to me, I mean, is our intelligence able to see this kind of thing from spy satellites and that sort of thing, or do they have to rely on more old-fashioned methods of finding out?
You can't follow a tactical situation from spy satellites, but you can listen in to tactical communications, and you can talk to people who are on the ground, and there were some diplomatic observers on the ground.
I see. A Chinese spokesman introducing Sihanouk at that press conference we just saw a piece of said the fighting was not over, or the war was not over. But Mr. Sihanouk himself seemed to be in some doubt as to whether the Chinese were going to intervene. Does Washington, do our analysts expect the Chinese to intervene against Vietnam?
There is no feeling whatever that China would consider any activity in Cambodia. The Chinese have built up a force of about 15,000 along the China-Vietnam border. They continue to build up as of this time, but the Chinese have more to gain than to lose by not exercising a military option against Vietnam. So the general feeling is that China will not retaliate.
Is the feeling in official circles in Washington that the Russians have scored a big one in this if the Vietnamese were their allies and the Cambodians were had the Chinese as allies?
Moscow has been increasingly apoplectic of late about the Chinese. They have been concerned when the Chinese started an anti-Soviet campaign in their backyard in Romania and Yugoslavia. They were concerned when America normalized relations with Peking. They were concerned even more when Western European nations showed some interest, in fact, determination to sell arms and even weapons plants to the Chinese. And so finally, they have some good news.
Do the intelligence analysts you've been talking to give any credence to the idea that many Cambodians actually welcomed the fall of getting rid of Pol Pot?
Pol Pot was not considered a very friendly father figure in his own society, as best can be determined at a distance. You could tell from the emotion that was evoked by Prince Sihanouk about people not being cattle as probably illustrating what the popular resentment was.
And has Washington figured out what to do if this comes to a battle at the United Nations, supposing that debate takes place later this week?
There still must be a determination by the Carter administration as to what to do. But generally speaking, it probably would not support an effort to expel Vietnam from the United Nations, will not take a leading role in whatever debate takes place, but probably would support an effort to condemn the aggression against Cambodia, a declaration of intent from the United Nations to ask foreign troops to get out, and a proposal that UN observers be sent into Cambodia to see that this takes place.
Thank you. Charlene?
Vietnam has been accused of trying to establish itself as the overlord in Southeast Asia. To some, including the Chinese who made that charge, this latest move into Cambodia bears out the so-called expansionist aims of Vietnam. Let's now examine that line of thinking with a man who has followed events in Indochina closely for many years. He is Alan Cameron, a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute here in Washington. He was formerly dean at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Mr. Cameron, are the fears about Vietnam's so-called expansionist aims in Indochina, in your view, justified?
Well, certainly in Indochina. Indochina is Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Laos has been a, if you will, satellite of the Vietnamese since 1975. This latest move wraps up somewhat shorthand, Cambodia. I think one must distinguish between expansionism in Indochina and expansionism elsewhere in Southeast Asia. The Vietnamese consider Indochina to be their preserve. They considered it that for 50 or 100 or more years. The rest of Southeast Asia is a different question.
Mm-hmm. The Chinese have accused Hanoi of acting as a surrogate for the Soviet Union. What's your view about that?
I do not agree with that, and I think that the somewhat simplistic characterization of the conflict as a surrogate war is fundamentally misleading. Yes, the Soviet Union supports generally Vietnam. Yes, China supports generally Cambodia. What I've seen in this particular instance indicates that, if anything, the Soviet Union has tried to restrain Vietnam, and there's some evidence, particularly from 6 or 8 months ago, that the Chinese had similarly tried to restrain the Cambodians. Mm-hmm. I think the two sides fighting is different from a surrogate or proxy war.
Right, you mean restrain with respect to advancing on Phnom Penh and so on.
Or restrain the Cambodians in the Chinese hand from taking actions against the Vietnamese. Yes.
Well, why, in your view, did Vietnam attack Cambodia?
Well, I think that it has been a goal of the leadership in Hanoi to amalgamate, if you will, Cambodia. I believe, as Dr. Porter said, that they perceived that the time was appropriate to do it. The dry season, sufficient military strength, a perception that there would be no intervention to support Cambodia. I believe the Vietnamese see the Chinese as basically paper tigers in this situation. The Chinese will talk but will not act. And a perception, as Dr. Porter said, that the regime in Cambodia was sufficiently unstable so that this kind of thing would make the difference.
Mm-hmm. How much of a presence are the Vietnamese going to be in any new government established in Kampuchea?
I think that's hard to say because the composition and strength of this front is very hard to determine. My guess would be that the Vietnamese presence will be very strong but not obvious, just as it is not obvious in Laos that the Vietnamese are basically behind what is going on. Mm-hmm. I do not think that the Vietnamese are going to have to worry about tremendous amounts of resistance at the rice paddy level.
Is that because of the past history of the Pol Pot regime?
Well, I think that, and basically in a situation like this, as we learned in Vietnam, the population at large is essentially apolitical. They will react in a xenophobic way against foreigners, and I would presume that as the Vietnamese try to structure the country, they're going to minimize their obvious presence, particularly among the large population, rural population, and work through Cambodians, and there will be Cambodians to work through.
Mm-hmm. Well, finally, the United States has called on Vietnam to pull out of Cambodia, just call the whole thing off and forget it happened. What's your view of that?
I think the United States, in the best of all possible worlds, would have had nothing to do with the situation at all. We cannot influence it. we cannot influence the Vietnamese. I think the danger of a wider conflict from this is minimal, if not non-existent. We appear now to others, although not perhaps to ourselves, to have taken the Cambodian side, which I think is unfortunate. I think we would have done better to distance ourselves and to have said nothing.
All right, thank you. Robin?
Let's get another view of what the American interest is now in Indochina. Donald Zagoria is professor of government at Hunter College in New York. He's the author of books on the relations of Russia and China and their respective relations with Vietnam. Professor Zagoria, does Vietnam want to absorb, or to use the word we've just heard, amalgamate Cambodia?
Yes, I agree with what's been said so far, that it has been the objective of the Vietnamese communists to amalgamate Laos and Cambodia into a greater Vietnam, a greater Indochina, ever since the formation of the Vietnamese Communist Party in the 1930s. They wanted to take over the former French Empire in Indochina. But I think it is questionable whether they will be able to do so. I was very impressed with Sihanouk's statement indicating that although he is opposed to the Pol Pot government, he wants to defend the territorial integrity of Cambodia against Vietnam. I should expect that this is a very strong feeling in Cambodia. After all, we are dealing with very intense nationalism that has a history of 8 or 9 centuries of Vietnamese-Cambodian conflict. And as a matter of fact, what is now happening in Asia is the revival of pre-modern, pre-colonial ethnic and national conflicts, Vietnam against China, Cambodia against Vietnam, Russia against China. So I think that the Vietnamese will have all they can do to absorb Cambodia.
Do you agree with what I took Dr. Porter to mean, in part, that U.S. acceptance of normalization, President Carter's announcement that he was going to normalize relations with Peking was, in a sense, a precipitating factor in this?
I'm not sure about that. I think that it may have been simply the opportunity was ripe. The dry season has now come about. The Pol Pot government is very unpopular. The Vietnamese saw an opportunity. There was nothing to stop them.
The Pol Pot government has been accused, although it's never been actually confirmed, of practicing genocide on its own people, or part of it. Should Americans be mourning the fall of the Pol Pot government even at the hands of the Vietnamese?
No, I don't think that we should shed any tears over the fall of what is one of the most despotic governments in modern history. At the same time, we must oppose the swallowing up of one country by a larger neighbor. This is a precedent that the international community cannot tolerate.
What should the United States do about it?
Well, I think it's in the American interest to do essentially what we are trying to do. In the first instance, as in any regional conflict, our interest is in trying to contain it. Contrary to what was said earlier, I think this is a particularly dangerous regional conflict because there is a great potential for spread. It involves 2 major powers, Russia and China, plus a very large regional power, Vietnam. All of them are heavily armed. All of them are deeply suspicious of each other. All of them have troops on each other's borders. This is an enormous danger that threatens not only the peace of Asia, but potentially the peace of the world. And therefore, I think our primary interest is in trying to use our influence to contain the conflict.
Okay, let's open this up to the others again and talk first of all about the danger to the countries immediately adjoining Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Malaysia. Mr. Porter, Dr. Porter, do you think there is this large Vietnamese army, I believe it is the 6th largest in the world, flushed with this success, now poses a kind of expansionist danger in the rest of the Indochina Peninsula?
No, I don't think so, and I don't believe the other countries of ASEAN, for example, view Vietnam in that way. I was in both Thailand and Malaysia in November and December, and the reaction that the foreign ministry officials that I talked to there had to the situation in Cambodia, which is already at that time developing in a way that suggested to everyone that the Pol Pot government did not have very long to survive, was that the real danger here was not that the Vietnamese were going to sweep through Southeast Asia, but that in the process of Vietnam signing an agreement with the Soviet Union, in the process of the Chinese pressing Vietnam on Cambodia, that there could be a situation in which China and the Soviet Union, would be drawn into the conflict directly, and that would be what would threaten the ASEAN states, and they were most afraid.
Would you define the ASEAN states?
That's Thailand, the Philippines, Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Cameron?
Fundamentally, I think so. I think, to contradict something that you said at the top of the show, you have to understand, and the people who are listening to us have to understand, that this has not been a short war. It's been going on for basically almost 3 years now. It's not a new thing, whether you're talking about the relationship of Indochina to Southeast Asia, whether you're talking about the relationship between China and the Soviet Union, whether you're talking about the way that the Thai, for example, perceive it. The positions have been there, they've been established. That's one of the fundamental reasons that I do not share Dr. Zagoria's perception that this is a very explosive situation. The most surprising thing to me about our reading of this situation is that people are surprised by what happened.
Bill Beecher, do your sources in Washington in the administration feel that this is an explosive situation or one that we can be fairly quiet about?
Yes, and I would add a caveat to what has just been said. The Thais are extremely apprehensive about their own security stemming from the events of the last 2 weeks. They were even considering and discussed at some level with American officials the possibility of a military move to physically carve from the border area, from Cambodia itself, a buffer area, a buffer zone. They were thinking of using Cambodian refugees within their own borders as a cat's paw to carve this out, but the Vietnamese forces moved so quickly to invest the border area that this no longer is a feasible possibility. So the Thais are very apprehensive because now, for the first time, their entire eastern frontier, both along the Laotian and Cambodia borders, potentially could be infested, as they would say, by Vietnamese forces, expansionist Vietnamese forces. Over the long run, they are very nervous about that.
Could I throw in a footnote to the caveat?
If you'll make it a brief one, sir.
You must remember historically that the Vietnamese, the Thai, like the Vietnamese, have had designs in Cambodia. The Vietnamese and the Thai were in process of partitioning the country when the French came in the middle of the 19th century. During World War II, the Thai annexed, with Japanese support, the two western provinces of Cambodia, which they still considered to be Thai territory. Whether the Thai might try to revive their historical, ethnic, and territorial conflict in the region is, I agree, a matter for some concern.
Well, we have just a few seconds left. I'd just like to know, does the United States have any real option, Dr. Porter, right now?
Yes, I think I disagree with Dr. Cameron when he said that the United States cannot influence the situation. I think it's true that there's been a fait accompli in terms of a change of government, but looking to the future, the United States can influence Vietnam's foreign policy very clearly by having diplomatic relations as well as trade relations with that country, because in the absence of any relations with the United States, the Vietnamese don't have an incentive to pay any attention to what the United States' interests are. If they do have a significant relationship with the U.S., that becomes a constant reference point in their calculations.
Well, I regret we have to leave it there. Obviously, we could follow up. I'm sorry. Thank you all very much for joining us tonight. Good night, Charlene.
Good night, Robin.
That's all for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night. I'm Robert McNeil. Good night.